All right, I think we're ready to get started now. My name's Dave, and I've worked for Google for about 5.5 years. I spend most of my time actually working on API products. I've been responsible for our mobile syndication API for a lot of our work in healthcare and in the United States. And now I actually work for a team out of Zurich that is responsible for all of our work in sub-Saharan Africa. I've worked with Chewy quite a bit doing some developer outreach in Africa and was here just to see him for the weekend and then found out he's been stuck in Israel. So I'm going to jump in, hopefully be able to give you a brief overview of HTML5, point out some of the cool new features. It's important to recognize that HTML5 isn't just HTML. There are some changes in CSS. There are some changes in JavaScript. And hopefully we'll be able to touch on those. I don't want to spend the entire time here covering just throwing information at you. I'd like to be interactive. I'd like to make sure that you guys are comfortable asking questions. And to that extent, since I'm from our Swiss office, we have some token Swiss chocolates. If you ask a question, I'll see if I'm still good at throwing baseballs and if I can hit you with a chocolate. So feel free to stop me at any point as we go forward. Just raise your hand or shout it out. So again, rough timeline, HTML5 is significant because this is the first big change in about 12 years. It's been a change that's been coming. It's a lot of ideas coming together. Google was running with Gears for a while, which is to try to emulate some of the ideas that were coming forward in HTML5, but really last year it got hammered down. You can see on this timeline a rough outline. These things are always in a gray area because when the standard is there, maybe the browsers are there, maybe the browsers are there before the standard. But roughly what we're seeing is in the last 10 years there's been this huge explosion. And everybody talks about Ajax and what we're doing in HTML and working with the browser and using JavaScript heavier and heavier. But really HTML5 is giving us a lot of the functionality that we've been building up to. And so, as I mentioned, HTML5, it's not just HTML syntactic changes. Actually, to me, the changes in HTML, what the new elements are, aren't that interesting. There are a couple of them. They do some cool stuff around navigation and allowing your browser to detect what the different element sections are. But really, the cool features of HTML5, the things you've heard about, the offline support, the transitions, these are all changes that are coming forward out of the CSS and out of the JavaScript functionality. So let's start off with the JavaScript, because to me, that's the most interesting, but we're transitioning to the others as well. We have a bunch of new selectors. This is stuff for when you want to modify the DOM. How do you access your elements? How do you figure out which elements you want to modify? And what we've done here with HTML5 is allow you to grab selections by the class. So you can take, instead of an individual element, instead of just get element by ID, select all of the elements under the class. And maybe you want to focus on the first one. Maybe you want to focus on the third. This will allow you to do that type of arbitrary selection. For anybody that's following along on a laptop, if you're interested, these slides are publicly available. It's slides.html5rocks.com. Google did a very good naming with that one. With its html5rocks.com has both the slides as well as a couple of little code clinics, places that you could dive in. So we have an online interface if you just want to start mucking with some things and have it go back to the server and your browser will show you whatever you've just experimented with. Instead of slides.html5rocks, just go to html5rocks and you'll see it there. Okay, now, to me, this is one of the coolest. This and the SQL stuff is what's really powerful. A lot of people have been asking me as I go around Africa what we can do with offline support. And a lot of people heard about Google Gears, and Google Gears allows you to do a lot of work in the browser. Now that's no longer relevant. Really, the important thing is to be looking at HTML5. And internally, you may have seen we released a new version of the spreadsheet editor, a new version of the Word document editor. What those are using now is aiming for HTML5. They're no longer even aiming for Gears, just because this gives you the cross-browser support. For me, this is relevant because mobile devices. You've got Android devices, you've got iPhone devices that are supporting HTML5 in the offline storage already. So if you want to build a web app and you want it to be available in a low connectivity place, somebody can load it up on their phone and still interact with it while they're offline. So getting into the web storage, this is the first of the two types of storage with the browser. And this is just a simple demo. If I wanted to type in foobar, have it save it, it should, I thought it would ask me if it would have permissions. But since I just installed this, I'm actually not sure if I'm going to be able to get to it. There's a developer console that you can load as a side component of Chrome. And Shift J? Thanks. I know where it is on my Mac. Awesome. Would you like to give this presentation? So what you get to see now is with the offline storage, if you're going into our developer console for Chrome, you can see the storage. We're going to bring up in a second a database, but also you can see, sorry, this is the cookies. Would you like to tell me where it's storing it now? Because I don't see it. Normally it would ask you for permission, so maybe it's telling me that it saved it, but it didn't really. We'll jump ahead to the to-do items, because I know this is the one that stores it into the SQL database, which I can see. So if we create the table, then with a refresh, I can see that it created this test table. And we can enter item 42, which is always the answer. And we add the new to-do item, and if we refresh the database, you can see inserting item IDs. So the secret to happiness, whether it's in web development, whether it's in life, is always going to be lower your expectations. Don't expect the heaviest SQL transactions to be able to work in the web browser, but if you stick to lightweight functionality, you're going to be pleasantly surprised. And that's true on the desktop, and as I mentioned before, the phone. It's just a little phone, but some of these have 1 gigahertz processors in them. You'd be surprised what it can handle. Again, don't go slamming it as hard as you can if you want to get a wide audience, but you'd be surprised with lightweight functions what we're actually able to accomplish. So that gets into the two parts of the storage. We have the SQL in the browser, and we also have the cache mechanism, if you will. There's the question of whether you would prefer using cookies to store that information or whether you want to store it as part of the JavaScript. For me, when you're debugging and just trying to do something quickly and you don't want to be setting cookie headers from the server, you want to be able to control as much as possible in JavaScript, HTML5 gives you a great, easy way in order to accomplish that. It's a way to put key value pairs into your browser store. And then with the SQL, it's allowing you to do interesting transactions and interesting queries. So then we get into the cache API. The cache API is going to allow you to use your application well. You have no connectivity. Again, important desktop and browser. This is allowing you to interact with the application. And this is making it really valuable for the consumer who wants to just store the application locally. And while I travel, I have the application that says, here's your trip that's planned out. I may or may not be able to roam in this country. Conveniently, you guys have great 3G connectivity, so it's a moot point. But this is how we get to store that information, to store the cached versions off of the web onto the actual device. And then finally, getting into web workers. This is an easier demo for you to play with locally, but you can see the the blue dots. On this, what we're trying to show you is the background functionality that's offered in HTML5. So traditionally, if we wanted to start finding the route, all we're going to do here is connect the dots. It's a rather simple application, but it's anything that would require a bunch of CPU. So if we find the route without the workers and I try to drag this around, not going to happen. We're blocked based on the drawing of the lines. And eventually the lines will come up, and then as they pop up, I'll be able to drag it again. Let's count to 5. There we are. And once again, we can drive the map. With the workers, this is going in and creating, if you will, different threads. They're not threads per se, but it's the same model in which you're able to spawn background work elements. So again, we perform the same task, but in the background, and you're still able to interact with the UI thread. Whenever you're developing an application, whether it's a desktop app, whether it's a web app, giving the priority to the UI is always a good thing. It's always important that the user feels like the app is responsive, even if in the background it's just chugging away. So being able to use the web workers with HTML5 makes it that you have that responsive, that snappy UI, while still being allowed to do your background processing. And sockets. If you want, you can actually get all the way down and use direct TCP sockets. This is pretty cool if you want to develop web apps that do voice over IP or something other than HTTP. To me, I don't know if this is as useful in the context of developing web apps, in the context of hacking along and getting some cool mashups. But if you're interested, we can go further into this later. Just feel free to ask me questions. And notifications. Both Chrome and I believe Safari are currently supporting the notifications. It's basically the WebKit products. And of course, you need to allow the browser to give you the desktop notifications. But then if I put in my group, which is actually Google Africa, then it should be able to pull up what the latest thing was that we tweeted. Actually, this is new from over the weekend since last time I checked this. Right. So this allows you to give standard notifications, and whether it's something that you want to drag in from an external resource like Twitter, we're also using this at Google for Calendar. So if you have Calendar in one window and you don't want it to suddenly give you that modal dialog box, that JavaScript alert window that pops up, you can use the WebKit notifications just to have the convenient little reminder in the corner. It's a prettier framework, and it's something that it's better for the user. And drag and drop. Now, if you wanted to, I should go ahead and just create a new text document, so because I'm not sure what these are here, but we'll say .doc1. HTML5 is allowing you, and we use this in Gmail to allow you now, if you're using an HTML5 browser, just drag and drop your attachments on. So you can imagine the case I wanted to hack up before this presentation, but I accidentally went to the wrong address first, so I haven't had a chance, was you can imagine a web application that uses our Maps API or uses anybody else's API in order to put your favorite restaurants onto the map. And then putting that into the browser, you can store those with ratings, put it 1 to 5 stars. And with SQL, you can easily have a slider bar. Some of the new bars in, that are permitted with HTML5 are pretty interesting. You get that slider element and say, show all the restaurants that are 3 or 5 or above, and go ahead and just graph those. What becomes interesting is if the user is more interested in their favorite restaurants than your favorite restaurants. You can imagine just dragging and dropping some type of CSV file, some type of XML document, and right into the web app is able to render it in JavaScript and able to pick up that formatting. So the drag and drop is pretty cool and makes it so the user can interact with your web application as though it was a desktop application. Geolocation is supported by some browsers, not all yet. This is how we developed the homepage that is aware of your location. So on the Google mobile homepage, if you've gone to it on a mobile device like a Android or an iPhone, it'll say on the homepage what your current location is. So for me, when I'm home, it'll say Zurich. Now that I'm here, I turn it on, and it says that, OK, you're now in Brno. This is relevant for us because we want to provide relevant information to where you are. But you may want to just show the map that's relevant. And let's see if this will, actually did a pretty good job. So the geolocation can come from a number of different sources, whether it's known distribution of Wi-Fi connectivity points. On the phone, it can directly go into the GPS. Otherwise, we could try to fall back into something like the IP address, though those geolocation by IP is not a very accurate thing. So this is just a rundown again of the things I just ran through. If anybody has questions, feel free to bring them up now. Otherwise, stop me afterwards. The things we covered were the client-side storage. And this is the SQL, this is the cache, this is the actual name value pair storage that you can do within your application. There's the communication, the WebSockets, as I said, to me, they're a cool thing, but they're not as relevant. They're not something that you're going to use every day. If you need them, they are there, and they are worth investigating. The workers are more important to me because they create that snappy UI while doing the heavyweight lifting somewhere in the background. It allows you to spawn off effectively, think of it as a thread, and it allows you to throw that work into the background. Finally, the desktop experience makes it a lot easier for you to interact and show the users an interaction that they're used to. The dragging and dropping with the browser, being able to give the notifications in a standard format, these are things that just makes your web application seem rich and allows you to develop in a way that is intuitive to the user. Geolocation, it's extremely relevant on especially the mobile devices. And on desktop, sometimes you're able to get a good signal. Sometimes it's not as great. All right. Now we get into HTML, the actual new elements here. As I mentioned before, these are really helpful for showing the navigation of a page. To me, as a user, I don't interact with them all that frequently. Here are all the new semantic tags that are actually agreed upon. There's the header and the H group. These are just to group together different header elements and allow you to say title, subtitle. It's an interesting thing. It's up to you whether or not you actually find that to be the most useful. It's good for being able to drive navigation, and it's good for being able to show what the flow is from one section to another. And it comes up, I believe in this deck later, that this is useful for the Araya support. So when you're trying to do the support for screen readers, so your blind consumer is able to follow along with your web app, these help in that situation. So it depends on the context, but they're not as sexy and as interesting as the JavaScript and the CSS changes. So again, you've got the header with the H group, you've got the navigation, and you've got the sections to start spreading your information. So if you have a blog, you can imagine a series of articles. It's just a logical grouping. Aside is a semantic tag to indicate this is tangential information. This will normally be your left-hand nav, if you will. So maybe you have a navigation across the top, but then you have related information over here down the side. Over here on the side, that would be a logical place to use this aside tag to indicate this is tangentially relevant information, but it's not a direct component. It's not directly a part of what you're presenting to the user on this page. Footer, I think that's pretty self-explanatory to everybody. Link relations are allowing us to get more interactive. This is allowing you to say within the browser, if you want to subscribe to the RSS feed, if you want to go ahead and prefetch the next document that we think is likely to be relevant to the user. These are all relations that are just continued extensions on the already present link relations. So you can read through them. I don't think I need to jump through all of them here. Again, if you need these slides, slides.html5 rocks. It's also in all the HTML5 documentation. And as I said, these seem pretty self-explanatory, but if you have questions, raise your hand. Microdata is allowing us to do a better job of indexing your page. It allows all of the search engines to understand some semantic data and some semantic information out of what you're presenting to the user. So you can start to do, again, the name value pairs, being able to tie together what the name of the band is or what the name of the user is. And it's also being able to define item types. I'm not sure if you're very familiar with the Google Data APIs. We have this idea of a kind. And the kind represents a structure of information about some entity. And the kind may be a person, a place, it may be a calendar entry, an event. What we're starting to see here on web documents is the same type of semantic data being presented with an item type. Here there's the item type to say, this is a band. And we would expect a band to have a name. We would expect the band to have a nationality. So these are tying together name value pairs back to a kind so that we're able to understand not just that there's this value set, but also how that value set relates. So how that value set is relevant in the scope of this particular entity. So this is what I mentioned with the navigation. The Uriah attributes tie in very cleanly with the navigation. This is very helpful for individuals that are blind, that are using the screen readers, that aren't able to actually look at the screen and understand the information directly. For those of you that aren't familiar, the Uriah is the accessibility for rich internet applications, and it allows you to present the information and to tag the information. Did it completely wash out when the lights went up? Sorry. I'm not sure, have any of you used a screen reader before? Are you familiar with them? Show of hands. I see a smattering. Okay. Depending on what your audience is, this may be relevant and it may not be. For us, trying to present data to all of the users in an accessible fashion, it becomes an important part of our work. Again, it's something that is worth being aware of. If you're trying to reach that particular audience, it's extremely relevant, but you should just be aware that it's there, and HTML5 has done a better job of bringing it in. So instead of just being a side component that people acknowledge, it's something that's a part of the HTML5 spec. Field types. Okay, now we get into more of the fun and interesting things. So there's a number that are implemented, and there are some that depends on the browser. So the interesting ones that are pretty across the board, pretty universally supported, are just having draggers. So this is before where I said you want to say stars, 0 to 5 or 0 to 3, whatever spectrum you want. You want to be able to allow the user just to drag. They shouldn't have to type in a number when what they want is to select something within a given range. And this is what the range input type is allowing us to do now. It's allowing you to do what you would expect with that natural element. Search is, as you'd expect, search box, pretty self-explanatory. And placeholder is allowing you to do that default entry of text, which you would normally do with JavaScript. You normally have the on focus, and you change it and swap out what your default placeholder text was, but now it's actually just part of the input text type. With validation, we have some basic validation going on and being demonstrated here. Chrome does support these, so it makes it convenient. If I type in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's not going to object, but if I type in a couple of letters, it will. The color is interesting because it'll support simple things like red, white, but it'll also support if you go into the hex values. Oops. If you push the number 3, by the way, on this presentation, it'll zoom in and out on you. Go back to that. So there's basic validation. Emails are usually relevant, and people frequently do this in JavaScript. It's another way just to let the browser handle it. Obviously, on your server side, you're still will want to provide that secondary validation, but this is a way for simplifying your life in the browser world. There are these 3 that are not yet there. We think they're on the horizon. We think they're going to be coming, so you might want to be aware of them. With the meter, this is just, it's a gauge for scalar variables. This is just another type of input mechanism for showing a range of this to this, and you want to be able to allow the user to select somewhere there. With the progress, this is what you would normally expect from a download reader. You want to show your 20% downloaded, 30%, so on and so forth. The final one, the output, is just to recognize that whatever appears in this element is expected to be the output of some function. So if you have JavaScript that computes a value, you may want to display it as an output and be able to present it with a semantically correct element. All right, audio and video. I'm going to be excited to see what actually works in here. I'm used to working in a different environment, but we're allowing you, to just put in with HTML5 audio and video tags. And if you look at the source for this page, it'll define for the video 3 different potential sources, and they're the formats that the browser may or may not support. But with one video tag, you define the 3 different sources, and it will show you. Let's see if I can see. Yeah. You define your 3 sources, and whichever one the browser is capable of rendering, it'll pick up and run with that. If the browser is not HTML5 compliant, we're just going to show you that default browser doesn't support this video. But again, with those basic functionalities, let me rewind here and play. You can also support the pause and the muting. We don't actually have volume, I don't believe, but you get the idea. Similar thing for the audio. The video is a little more interesting because it gives you a little bit of flash, but the audio tag is supported the same way. Canvas rendering, we can get into this if you're interested. There's some 3D support, but there's a lot of 2D support. So this is showing with that little snippet of code how you would start to say, on this 2D canvas, I want to draw a box, I want to draw an arc. And you don't have to do an overlay of an image. You can actually just say, draw this arc, here's the radius, here's the path that we want to follow. It's giving you some way to start interacting with the canvas in a rich environment, just like you would in a Forms application. Example here, it allows you you can just drag around, and if you want, you can start playing with corners. And so all this is actually happening within the browser and just using the simple canvas support that's been enabled by HTML5. If you have more questions on this, we can come back to this, but this is just showing a simple way that you can modify without any boundaries. If you want, you put a simple boundary. If you want, you draw that thick boundary at the bottom for the Polaroid effect. This is allowing us to start to play with a really rich environment without having to require the Flash plugin or without requiring you to do everything from scratch inside of JavaScript. And this is what I mentioned. There's some 3D support, and it appears that this is not going to play for me. But there's some basic 3D support that's available. As this is showing you right now, it's not across all of the browsers. I'm surprised it's not on this browser. But, 2D is something that's rich. It's there. 3D, we're just saying that that's something that's coming, the same as those meter and progress bars. If you want to do scalable vector graphics, again, they're there. This is just a simple example of drawing the circle. If you want, we can do some type of alerting on it, and you can do the mouse up, mouse down events on top of a circle. Simple scalar vectorable graphics. They're fun. They're good to play with. Here's the example. If you want, just zoom in, and it'll be able to support it. All of this stuff with HTML5 as opposed to doing it in some type of Flash object. It's just making it simpler and easier to interact with. Are there any questions so far, given that I've been going about a mile a minute and it is only 9 in the morning? Yes, sir.
I'd like to know how do you handle clicks in Canvas?
Clicks in the canvas, to the best of my knowledge, are still just the on-mouse down events, unless I missed something. In the case of, you mean in terms of just dragging this around?
And resizing and clicking those objects you don't know in Canvas.
Yeah, so it's an on-mouse event, and you can go and from the direct on-mouse event for the element, make a call to JavaScript. And so we're...
So you got to handle the zones yourself, like in the Canvas.
So you're handling on the element. Let me see if I can pull up the support on this. Somebody said it was Control-Shift-J. Was that? Thanks. And we cheated. We put it into an iframe, so it'll make it harder for me to show you. That wasn't very nice of us. If you step down later, I'll show it to you. What we're doing is we're throwing the different elements onto the canvas and reacting to those elements. It's not the full boundary itself that we're acting on. It's going to take me some time to dig into here and actually pull up the line that's showing it. Let me follow up with you on that at the end of the demo. Any other questions? And if you'd like a chocolate, I can throw it. See if I can still do this. Only off by 1. Thankfully, nobody was sitting next to you. All right. So vector graphics was the end of the HTML section, and we're going to move on from here into the CSS. So again, okay, we'll go quickly through CSS, even though that's one of the more interesting things. So HTML5, just a quick rewrap. There's a couple of new elements, not a ton of new elements.
Sorry, I misspelled. It should be the quarter to 20 minutes.
Yes. Couple of new elements, and more interesting than new elements is the support for the multimedia, and I think the canvas, the 2D and 3D that'll be coming with as WebGL gets more supported. So into the CSS. And the CSS, again, with the getting the elements, where we're now allowing you to, instead of grabbing an element by ID, you're able to grab a collection of elements, either selecting on the class or selecting on another, the nth identifier. With the CSS, we have the same selectors that you were able to get with the JavaScript methods. And so you can apply CSS based on these selection criteria. You can say, every even, make it this color, every odd, make it that color. And what you're seeing up in the snippet in the upper left is what actually is happening in that box. So it's allowing you to handle a number of different selection criteria, also the negation, and the rest of these are, if you're interested in them, we can get into them further afterwards, but they're pretty self-explanatory. The font support is pretty cool because now we can start to do more interesting things. That, to me, doesn't look like League Gothic font, but it's nice to know that it does graceful degradation. But you should also be able to do things like League Gothic, Droid, start to get into more interesting things than just Arial and Times New Roman. Now, text wrapping, what we're seeing here is all 3 of them have overflow. I wrote down exactly what they were. Yeah, overflow is hidden. On the second 2, the middle and the bottom one, it's showing you that there's no wrap. And on the third one, we've decided to apply text overflow ellipsis. And so you can see this is just a bunch of text that overflows here. Here, it just runs off the side of the page. And on the third one, no matter how long we make it, it's just going to throw an ellipsis at the end, and it's going to truncate on that text. So it's a pretty cool way to be able to just throw that up there. With the original Gmail developers, if you've ever looked at your inbox, we show as much as we can of the subject and the first line of text, and at the end we throw the ellipsis. That was a lot of code in order to be able to figure out exactly in the browser how much space was there, the size of the font, how many characters we wanted to display before throwing it up. And now the CSS will do it for you. This actually saves a ton of work if you're working on trying to specifically box into as much text as possible into a given frame. Column support, you're able to just throw it up there and say, we want 2 columns, we want 4 columns. It'll just be able to render and handle the text wrapping for you. Pretty self-explanatory, I think. And text stroke. You can start to apply on the edges what we call the stroke, so you can overrun the entire body, or if you want, you can just add a little bit. A little different way of playing with the text, playing with the fonts. Opacity is one of the more interesting parts of the CSS. So both with RGB and with the huge saturation and luminance, you can add the RGBA, HSLA, and you can start to change the opacity. This is changing the alpha channels, what it's actually doing. That's where the A comes from, is the alpha. So in the middle, you can see changing the opacity for the text makes it clear, makes it, there you go, a little more into the background, and if you want, block everything out. As I said, it's both RGB and it's HSL that you can do that on. And in this case, you can just fade it out. Interesting thing in order to overlay your text. If you want to overlay information without completely washing out the background content, start playing with the alpha channel. And then finally, rounded corners. You used to have to take an image, and when you lay out your page, you tell it, OK, you're going to put this image over here, this image over here, this image in this corner. And in order to actually display these conveniently rounded corners took a lot of effort. And it was usually some combination of overlay with some combination of a boundary that would actually take care of the middle and sides. Now, rounded corners is just a border radius element. All you have to do in your CSS, if you're applying a border, apply the radius, and it'll round those corners for you. Gradients are available if you're really interested in them. There's a number of different ways, whether you want to do linear, whether you want to do radial. The first element is defining what your method is and how you're going to vary this. Again, we have sliders on all of these to demo if you want to play with them, exactly how you control it and how you're able to modify. Shadows, I think, are pretty self-explanatory, unless anybody's interested in going deeply into them, or just skip on through. It's puts a shadow on the background. Instant web. So what we're showing here, this is pretty much a wrap-up of the last couple of slides, where if you want, you can round out the borders. If you want, you can apply a reflection. If you want, you can drop in a shadow. All these things are just CSS controlled, and now it's made it easy if you want to take a screenshot and say, my new logo is going to have rounded borders. Let's turn all of these up to make them exciting. There you go, and that's my new logo. But if you're jumping through our slides, this is a good one to jump to just to see kind of the wrap-up of how you play with the different elements as they apply to font. Background enhancements are, we can now say we're going to repeat one background and apply another one on top of it. So what you're seeing on the bottom of this slide is the repeated gray lines, but then also we're putting this, what we call a zippy is the plus sign. And so you put the zippy on top of the repeated background, and you're able to use multiple backgrounds now as part of HTML5. It's a minor thing. It may be convenient for you, and it may just be a hindrance if it's getting in the way. Now, with this, what we're showing you is you're able to resize elements, and with the background size, adjust with a couple more variations than you used to have. So you can keep it to fill, and you can, if you want, just start to play with things. Transitions are pretty exciting because now you can start to show the user the change between the beginning state and the end state. A lot of times you have the onload event, and the onload event will take care of, okay, well, here's our default header, but I know this user is in this location, or I know this user in the past has requested this type of content, therefore we want to change the header. Whenever you flick something on a screen on a user, it confuses them. They know something happened, but they're not really sure what. So CSS transitions is a good way to be able to say, here's the movement from point A to point B. I want you to be able to understand what's going on, but yeah, we still want to use that onload event in order to change the default. So like I was saying, by default, you would have this pop it back and forth, and something changed, but the user may not be aware of what. And now you can slide it. You could define with the transition, there are actually 3 different properties in here. One of them is defining which property you want to watch. So in this case, with the box object, what we're showing is the transition is marking all 3 of them. The margin left is the element that's varying. The second one is the duration, so we want it over 1 second to allow the margin left to change for this element. And what we're using is this method called ease in, ease out. This is a method to define how the transition happens. There are a couple of different ones available to you, but in most of our examples, we're using ease in and ease out. So again, it's just allowing you to, over a 1 second window, change that margin left property, and the user is now able to follow along with what changes you made. Transforms, as opposed to the transitions, will allow you to rotate your boxes. So you can have the seesaw effect if that's what you're interested in. And what I did before when I was typing in the colors, by accident I hit the number 3. Number 3 will allow you, here we've used it as a transition just to zoom in and out the entire presentation and all of the slides that are available. Animations, please don't reinvent the blinking red text. Used to be the bane of our existence. A long time ago, somehow it was ranked relatively high, and we had all of these pages with blinking red text in the index that were just driving everybody bonkers. But you can do animations. I guess black is a better color than red, but use it sparingly, but it is there, and it is something to be aware of. All right, so that was the rundown with CSS, and with that, we've rounded out all 3 of the areas that are changing with HTML5. You've got the new HTML elements. We've got the JavaScript to allow you to store information in the browser, to allow you to start selecting on a richer model of elements, so not just by ID, getting them by class. Same way with CSS, we're allowing you to modify the objects by a variant in the selection criteria. You could do the positive or the negative using the negation elements. And as we've just shown you, you get all the transforms, the transitions, and the animations in there. So today, there's a variety of places in order to find all the support. So the WebGL support for Chrome is an extension. It's not on this browser, so I can't show you, but if I can get Wi-Fi later, I can show you on my laptop what it looks like. That allows us to do rich things like Google Earth in the browser, something that normally you would never consider possible. You can actually run all of that in the browser today. So you can see a number of these things supported inside of the modern browsers. With the iPhone, with the Android, you're getting it in the mobile devices. And through the extension models for Chrome, for Firefox, Safari, you're getting a richer integration into the browsers today. We expect those will be part of the native browser going forward in future iterations. For those people that are still on IE6, IE7, the Chrome frame is something that's just in the back of your mind. It's available. It's not something that's a long-term path. It's just as the browsers are currently not supporting all of the HTML5 elements, Chrome frame gives you a way to use the support that Chrome enables inside of the frame of the traditional browser. And with that, we're opening up to another round of questions and anybody else that wants chocolate. Yes?
Slide before was very nice. Today, commercials where everybody needs to target browsers that are, let's say, obsolete or old, anything like that, because when I'm designing a page, I simply cannot show the user that your browser is not supported, because when I show this to my customer, he will say, oh, I will not pay for that. So what's the good?
So that's a very good question. The question was, there's a necessity to support the older browsers. There's a need to, if you're doing a contract work, you need to be able to work within the environment that the client has. For me, this is very important, and this is very near and dear to me, because all my work in Africa, by far, the vast majority of internet cafes down there are using IE6, and they're probably on a Pentium 3 machine. So a lot of these transitions, even if you are able to get into the browser, it kind of chugs along. it's an argument to be aware of your audience. In the case that you're describing, Chrome frame is an option. If it's not an option for policy reasons or for procedure reasons, then unfortunately you're going to have to work within the realm of HTML5. And it's the same for me, where I need to determine, do I want to appeal to the mobile consumer, the guy that's using a brand new device that's going to support the HTML5, or do I want to appeal to the guy that's going to the cyber cafe and he's going to be using an old browser and I need to stick to HTML4? It's a difficult trade-off. It's one to be established. I do recognize that a lot of the times that you go in and do any type of work as a consultant or as a contract, there's going to be limitations on the functionality that you're able to use. HTML5 right now, it's only in the newest of browsers. It's only in the cutting edge. It's really going to be for applications you make for your peers right now. It's going to be for the startup that you have. That's a fun idea of something you want to play with and you want to rapidly develop and iterate. It's getting there. In a couple of years, we expect all the browsers will do that and will support it. And you can already see from ComScore and from the data that the prevalence of those older browsers is going down. But it's still a significant presence. It's still all over the market.
And is there some forces to, let's say, the company that will do something, or we are simply doomed that we need to wait and they will decide to do it? Or?
They've done some interesting things to actually push people off of IE6 in particular. There were some interesting moves to bundle the Internet Explorer upgrades, and as a company, they've actively been encouraging their users to move forward with newer browsers. IE9, as it comes out, I believe will support a lot of the HTML5, and they're pushing as hard as they can in order to get people to upgrade as well. It's in their interest as well. You will continue to have for some years the old machines with the old operating systems that aren't on automatic upgrades, that are in a low connectivity place where if they even wanted to download the 100 meg update for Internet Explorer, it's going to take them, hours maybe. So it's going to be a while. But they're working on it. Obviously, as a company, we're incentivized to encourage people to use our browser as well. It's a work in progress still. Yes, sir?
You spoke about new types like color and telephone. What about localization? Is that possible to check colors?
So I'm not familiar with any input so the question was regarding the input validations. We have input validation for email, for phone number, for color that were demonstrated in this deck. The question was, is there a validation scheme for location? I'm not aware of one right now because the quality of the validation changes all the time. When we within Google produce geolocation, it's a complex formula of trying to start at the end of the address and rolling back, and maybe you're looking at something that's really a business and a location, or maybe it's just a location but we only understood half of it. So in addition to getting something like a lat long coordinate, there's a probability or a confidence interval that's returned. And where people want to set that confidence interval to be the threshold of the validation is a tricky area. And do you put that in the browser settings? Do you leave it up to the browser manufacturer? So for now, there isn't the location validation within HTML5. It's a logical thing to come in the future, but it's not there right now. And I think a lot of the reason is based on just uncertainty over what becomes a true location versus a guess location.
You will understand the question wrong. I think
Oh, I'm sorry.
the question was about input validation of colors, which are made in English, for example, white and black, color red. And the question was about localization.
Oh.
So if you could write Charavera instead of red.
I'm not familiar with that word, but yes, I will take you that means red. That's a really good question. And traditionally, unfortunately, the web standards have been very English-centric. So I don't believe that the validation here will support localization. The only way I would see it being possible is if it supported English and the local, I don't see that it would be able to support every color possible.
Is there any possibility to have custom validation?
Yes, there is custom validation that you can implement.
Check translations for colors and let the page correlate.
Yes, it is definitely possible to define your own validation. So it is a logical thing to expect these localized versions of the validation support to pop up. I haven't seen it yet, but that's a good point. Yes, you can do your own validation. Yes, sir.
Does core standardize the core or just send input of that textually? I mean, if I enter red, if I got on the server side red or hash FF0000. Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. I don't know the answer. The way, come down afterwards and we'll check. The question was if the user inputs red on the server side, when they see that input, do they see the value red or do they see hash, whatever the hash code is for the color red? I expect that they're going to see red, but I'm not 100% positive of that. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I want to ask you about columns from support. There is WebKit, there is Mozilla, there is without something about why there are so many options. I know this is because some backward compatibility, but why there is different when I try WebKit, column 3,
Yep.
and without WebKit. There are no orders, it's different.
Yeah, so there are going to be three major rendering engines. I don't know what the code name is for Internet Explorer, but you've got Gecko and you've got WebKit. And really the Safari and the what we call Chrome and Chromium and the browser on the Android and the browser on the iPhone, those are all variations of one rendering, and then Mozilla and Camino and that body is another rendering set. They're trying to converge, and this is to the extent that IE put it in the, I believe it was standards mode or compatibility mode. They tried to start moving it in one uniform direction. This is the value of the acid test. This is the value of having ACID 3 in order to standardize browsers to one behavior, as you would expect based on the CSS for an individual element. They've developed a number of different browsers for a number of different reasons. Some of it has been speed, some of it has been being interoperable, some of it has just been open source communities building up different library kits that they can use both within the browser and within other environments. Now that it's first diverged, but then kind of merged again. For instance, on Linux, I used to use Conqueror all the time. I haven't used it in probably 2 or 3 years now, so I see a bit of convergence happening. Hopefully with more acid tests. I'm not sure when we're going to see another one, but that'll bring them even closer together. Did that answer the question? So to get to your original question was why were there so many different ones? And I could tell you with Chrome, the reason for why was we wanted to develop this VA technology, which was the JavaScript support. So we didn't focus so much on the rendering. We left that to WebKit, and that's why Chrome works very similarly to Safari when rendering a page. Our focus was on the speed of the JavaScript implementation. I don't know what all the other reasons were for diverging from an already existent behavior, but I expect they were related to some area of performance. All right, anybody else? Yes, sir.
But it's like, I've been here, I've been late, so I don't know if you answered this question. Can you explain the difference between those divs and the micro formats? Do you think that these constructions will replace existing standards, or?
I think what this is this is the spec that's being agreed upon across all of the browsers. So in a sense, yes. The same as Google created some extensions to Atom, and we said these are the Google Data APIs, and a number of those changes have just become part of the Atom spec. The extensions that were available through microformats, with them becoming standardized across browsers as part of what they're now calling the microdata, hopefully there will be the same convergence where things are just moving into the HTML5 support.